Is everything on up here that needs to be, or? Okay.
Looks like we got, you know, anybody else that's coming on? Want to go ahead and start?
I want to reiterate the frustration that I felt once we looked into this Walmart incident that occurred on August the 2nd. I understand the public's frustration because I felt the same frustration. I wanted to go over a little bit as far as what occurred during the investigation and that type of thing. Obviously, the police were called, THPD, and as part of the investigation, management was interviewed, and actually the next day, Chief Keene and I, we had several phone conversations. A detective was assigned to this case also to do some follow-up investigation. So management was interviewed, employees were interviewed that were working at the time, some patrons of the store were interviewed. The word was put out there personally by me and by THPD that if anybody had any additional information or had information to please come forward, that we take their statement. And ultimately, Walmart released the surveillance tapes to us. And that's the reason for the press conference today. So I now have personally had an opportunity to review those surveillance tapes. They start when the two individuals get out of their vehicle. So we have surveillance tape all the way through the parking lot till they enter the building, till they go to the subway, and it looks like purchase a drink, then go over by the jewelry counter and are looking at some of the jewelry that's beside the jewelry counter when the police arrive. So we believe that we have surveillance tape that covers pretty much everything that happened in the parking lot and everything that happened inside the Walmart. So we can deal now in facts and not in what I call Facebook facts. Because I received private messages, hey, they pointed the gun at someone, hey, a shot was fired, hey, one of them went like this with his finger and said bang. All of these Facebook facts, as I call them. We're releasing the surveillance tape today in order to be transparent so that anybody can view it and see exactly what we've seen and making our decisions in this, with regard to this case. I would tell you a number of things go into determining if a criminal charge is filed in a case. We take an oath to follow the law and uphold that law. In this case, first, we looked at the criminal statutes to decide if, in fact, any certain criminal statutes applied. Obviously, we've been doing this long enough now. I mean, I've been the elected prosecutor for almost 16 years. I was a deputy prosecutor for like 22 years. That there's some things we just know off the cuff. This applies, but this was kind of an unusual situation. So we reviewed the statutes. There was not a statute that fits where we could say any crime occurred. So the second thing then we do is we can look at case law that interpret those statutes to make sure that we are interpreting every word of the statute correctly. And every fact situation is different. One little fact can make a difference on whether a statute applies or does not apply. So we reviewed the case law on a couple of the statutes that we felt like, you know, it seems like these should apply even though according to the facts they aren't applying. And those cases are cases where the Court of Appeals and or the Indiana Supreme Court has reviewed fact situations on cases that have already occurred that went up for appeal that give us a basis for defining what different words mean in the statutes and how they're to be applied. After doing all that, we still came to the same conclusion, that there is not a crime in the state of Indiana that fits what occurred at the Walmart on August the 2nd. So the question becomes, so we continue the investigation, we reviewed everything again, looked at the surveillance cameras. I looked at them day before yesterday myself personally. Other people in my office reviewed them also. We still came to the same conclusion. there's not a crime in the state of Indiana that fits, that could be filed. So the question going forward is, where do we go from here? I mean, it was very bad judgment on the two individuals. I understand the concern. Where do we go from here? So I contacted Senator John Ford and told him that we need to adopt a law in the state of Indiana that makes it a crime to carry a weapon in a business with a full face mask on. And he agreed with my recommendation. He is now looking into that and going to see if that's something that we could push through the legislature to see if we get a law adopted going forward. So I guess, you know, what I would say is we've done our due diligence. The THPD and Chief Keene have done their work. Thorough investigation was done in this case. We're being transparent. We're releasing the surveillance tapes. I'm not going to get into trying to explain everything on the surveillance tapes, but I will say this. The two individuals never confronted anybody from the surveillance tapes, never spoke to anybody other than someone that obviously they were friends with, and they were smiling, though the one individual didn't have a mask. The other thing is, too, the Facebook facts showed that, or said that both individuals had masks. That's not true. One of them did not have a mask at all, did not have a weapon at all. So you can see his face and see him talking to what appears to be one of their friends, who then just goes out of the store. But nothing happened in the surveillance videos. I mean, they never confronted anybody, never touched the gun, never pulled the gun out, never did anything other than go into the subway, then go on shopping in the store looking at items. So everybody can view that for themselves. They can see what we were confronted with in this case in trying to make a decision. So with that said, I want to turn this over to Chief Keene if he has anything to add, and then we'll answer any questions to be answered at this point.
I really don't have anything to add in addition to what Terry's already said, other than from a law enforcement standpoint, it was frustrating to have all those resources drawn away from the rest of the city to deal with this incident, and I share in the same frustration that he and many of the people that experienced this had, that you know, nothing more could have been done about this. But understanding the facts as we do now, and we understand that the law is the law and we have to abide by the law. So if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer.
Are there any info into, for example, age and are they from the area?
They are from the area. We don't typically identify people that are just suspects in crimes unless we have probable cause to charge them with a crime.
And in this situation, to refer back, we saw what happened. I think when Mall Good Samaritan steps up when there was a threat, I know the situation is different, for example, because there was an actual gunman in that. But when it comes to this situation, how fortunate are those two individuals that no one had a gun and or fired at them?
I think that context needs to be evaluated once you watch the video, and then you can, and anyone out there can determine that for themselves if there was something that was done that would rise to that level. But obviously that's a concern. I mean, generally you hear about someone coming into, you know, a public place with a mask and a gun, and it turns out to not be a real gun. The fear is, well, they could have easily been shot by someone who thought they meant to do harm. So I think that's a reasonable concern for all of us and the public. But I think, as Terry said, he's going to put this video out here so you guys can see everything and have a better context of what happened that day. So.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason also that I think there needs to be a law put in place to deal with this. Now think about this for a minute. I mean, there are some people, because their religious beliefs, wear full veils, full face coverings, you know, in businesses and out in public too. So I personally think, as an attorney and the prosecutor, that, you know, we're going to have to deal with this since we're having these mass shootings of what's going on out there in the world and the Greenwood Mall situation. So I think that's something that the law is going to have to take a step in dealing with going forward. And obviously we don't make the laws, but that's where, you know, why I contacted Senator Ford, and the legislature, I think, needs to, you know, speak to this going forward.
Obviously, open carry is not policy of law enforcement groups. Is this sort of a backdoor problem to that they can just walk in with a gun and not even be arrested for disturbing the peace?
Do you want to, since he said law, or do you want me to deal with that?
I mean, I guess when we're talking about disturbing the peace, that's probably better answered by you from a legal standpoint.
I mean, everybody's got their different opinions on the open carry law in Indiana. It is what it is. We don't make the law, so we'll have to deal with it. You know, you have the other side of that, hey, I should be allowed to carry to protect myself because I am an innocent citizen. I'm not a criminal, those kind of things. The criminals are going to have their guns anyway, no matter what the laws say. So I see both sides of that. I mean, again, I'm not going to speak for the legislature. We follow the laws. We take an oath to follow them. They decide what they are, and then we have to deal with them from there. So that's pretty much my position on it.
Well, can you talk about the just the idea of the disturbing the peace doesn't even fall into a category here because of open carry?
Well, yes, because, I mean, and again, I'd go back to the surveillance tape, and that is that there was really, they didn't do anything proactively to disturb the peace at all. I mean, they did nothing any different than anybody else that was in there shopping and or getting something at a Subway, other than you could see in his belt that he had a weapon and he had a full face mask on. It's not against the law to wear a full face mask. It's not against the law with the open carry law now to carry a gun. So that's what we're up against. There was nothing different otherwise. And again, I'm not going to speak for the tape. As they say in court, the tape speaks for itself. So we're putting it out there. Everybody can view it, and they can form their own opinion.
I know you kind of mentioned this a second ago, reaching out to Senator Ford, but I guess what would constitute as a threat? Because would it be fair to say people could feel threatened when you see someone walk in with a face mask on and a gun in their waistband?
Well, I mean, again, that's a very specific legal question. I mean, under the law, I mean, to be a threat, I have to do something essentially proactive. I mean, you know, I could decide that you're a big guy, and just because you walk in this door, you know, I feel threatened, you know. But again, the law has specific elements of the crime. I mean, you know, if I pull the gun out, that could be considered a threat. If I point the gun at you, that's definitely a threat. If I fire the gun in a place that I should not be firing a gun, that's definitely considered a threat. So again, it's very fact specific under the statute as far as what would constitute a threat. If I verbalize a threat, that's clear cut, obviously, also.
And then in this case, what were some of those charges considered given what happened?
That's something that, I mean, it would take us quite a while to discuss all that, but in the handout that we gave you, we put a few examples in there, like disorderly conduct, for instance. I mean, obviously, we looked at intimidation. So just we tried to just kind of like give you an example in the press release just to kind of show the analysis of what takes place as far as, you know, whether this would apply or not apply.
I guess my last one for you is that you have to both express frustration over this incident that happened and what kind of unfolded. Now with video being released and more out there, I guess, what would you both like to tell the community?
It's not a good idea to go in a business with a full mask carrying a weapon, because you may be seen as a robber, because obviously that's what people that are committing crimes like to do, to cover their face so that you can't identify them. So I mean, I would stress that I think that was a very, very poor judgment to do that. I mean, I understand we have COVID out here, so if you're wearing a COVID mask, that's a whole different thing. But to have a full face mask where your eyes just show and that kind of thing only is not a good idea, and it's asking for a problem, it's asking for trouble. It could lead someone to overreacting and pulling a gun on them or firing shots, either way. So, you know, I would not recommend it. In fact, I would discourage it, and hopefully we're going to have a law in place down the road that it will be a crime and we will prosecute someone for doing that in the future. Do you have anything you want to add, Shawn?
That's it.
Okay.
Good.